Can something as simple as an onion actually cause cancer or even make you lose your memory if you eat it the wrong way? It sounds shocking, maybe even unbelievable, but this is exactly the kind of claim that spreads quickly on the internet and leaves people confused about what's really true. Every day we hear mixed messages about food. One article says a food is a superfood, the next says it's dangerous. And onions, being one of the most common vegetables in kitchens around the world, have become the center of this debate. That's why today we're going to uncover the real truth, backed by solid scientific research, about onions and your health. Stay with me until the very end, because I'll also reveal the best way to eat onions so that instead of harming your body, they can actually protect it and boost your brain health. That's your reward for sticking around. You'll walk away knowing exactly how to make onions work for you, not against you. Now let's start with the problem. You've probably seen or heard people say that onions, under certain conditions, can be toxic or even carcinogenic, meaning cancer-causing. Others claim they can damage your memory or harm your brain if eaten in the wrong form. These statements sound scary, and fear often spreads faster than facts. But here's the truth. When we look at verified medical research and nutritional science, the story is very different from the rumors. In fact, onions are one of the most studied vegetables when it comes to their impact on cancer risk and brain health, and the findings are surprisingly positive. Before diving into what makes onions healthy, it's important to understand why these alarming claims exist in the first place. Misinformation often comes from misinterpreting scientific studies. For example, some laboratory experiments test very high doses of onion extracts on isolated cells. Results from these lab conditions are sometimes exaggerated and taken out of context, leading people to believe that onions in everyday meals might be harmful. Another reason is that people confuse onions with other substances that can form harmful compounds when burned, charred, or left spoiled. But everyday onions, eaten in normal amounts, do not show evidence of causing cancer or memory loss. Quite the opposite. They are linked with reduced cancer risk and better memory performance in several peer-reviewed studies. Still, it's normal to feel uncertain, especially when the information you see online contradicts itself. That's why this video is so important. Instead of leaving you with doubts, I'll share what nutrition science and clinical research really prove. For instance, compounds found in onions like quercetin and organosulfur compounds have strong antioxidant properties. These antioxidants help reduce oxidative stress, which is a key driver of cell damage that can lead to cancer or cognitive decline. Far from harming the brain, quercetin has been studied for its ability to protect neurons and even slow down memory loss in aging. And when it comes to cancer, population studies show that people who regularly consume onions and other related vegetables have a lower risk of certain cancers, including colorectal and stomach cancer. This is not speculation. It's evidence supported by reputable research. So why do people still believe onions are dangerous? Because fear sells. Headlines that warn you about a common food harming your health get more attention than headlines that say, eat more onions, they're good for you. But your health deserves better than half-truths and exaggerated stories. You deserve to know what is really happening in your body when you eat foods like onions, so you can make decisions with confidence. If you keep watching until the end, I'll give you the exact solution, the best way to eat onions to maximize their benefits and avoid any potential risks. This way, you'll know exactly how to protect yourself, improve your memory, and even reduce your risk of certain diseases. That knowledge is worth it, and I promise it will change the way you look at this simple, everyday vegetable forever. Stay with me, because the truth about onions may surprise you, but it will also empower you. When we hear that onions might cause cancer or memory loss, the first question we should ask is simple. What exactly is being claimed, and is there any solid proof behind it? The idea usually spreads in two forms. The first is that onions, if eaten in a certain way, might increase the risk of cancer. The second is that they might damage the brain and lead to problems with memory. These claims are repeated so often on blogs, in videos, and across social media that many people begin to believe them without questioning where the information actually comes from. And this is where the problem begins. Because while these statements sound dramatic and alarming, science tells a very different story. Let's start with the claim about cancer. Cancer is a disease that people fear deeply, and understandably so. It is one of the leading causes of death worldwide, and the thought that a common food could increase that risk feels frightening. The truth is that scientists have studied onions and cancer risk for decades, and the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that onions actually protect against cancer rather than cause it. Onions belong to the allium family of vegetables, which also includes garlic, leeks, and shallots. Multiple population studies have shown that people who regularly eat onions and other allium vegetables have a lower risk of developing certain cancers, including colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, and even breast cancer. This protective effect is linked to special compounds found in onions, especially quercetin, a powerful antioxidant, and sulfur-containing molecules that help the body detoxify harmful substances. So why do some people think onions could cause cancer? The answer often lies in confusion between different food processes. For example, when foods are burned or charred at high temperatures, they can produce harmful chemicals called acrylamides and heterocyclic amines. These substances are linked with cancer risk, but they come from extreme cooking methods like frying until blackened or grilling meat at very high heat. Onions, in their natural form, do not produce these compounds in dangerous amounts when cooked normally. But when people mix up the science, they take this small detail and spread it as if onions themselves are cancer-causing. The reality is exactly the opposite. Onions are one of the foods most associated with reducing cancer risk. Now let's move to the second claim, the one about memory loss. This is another powerful fear because memory is tied so closely to our identity and independence. The idea that onions could harm memory has no foundation in scientific evidence. In fact, it goes against what research actually shows. Quercetin, the same antioxidant that protects against cancer, has been studied for its benefits on brain health. Oxidative stress and inflammation are two of the biggest drivers of cognitive decline and memory problems, especially as we age. Quercetin helps fight both of these processes. Studies in both animals and humans have found that diets rich in quercetin and other flavonoids from onions can improve learning, support memory, and even protect the brain from degenerative changes. Far from causing memory loss, onions appear to help preserve memory. So again, where does the myth come from? Sometimes people hear that eating too much of a strong food can cause side effects like digestive upset, and they take that to mean the food harms the body in a deeper way. Other times, misinformation spreads simply because it is shocking and easy to repeat. Saying onions protect your brain does not travel as quickly online as onions can destroy your memory. But if you look for real scientific trials and studies published in reputable journals, you will not find evidence supporting the idea that onions harm the brain. What you will find are multiple pieces of evidence showing their protective role. The important thing to understand is that context matters. When you eat an onion as part of a balanced diet, you are not only safe, you are giving your body compounds that can lower inflammation, reduce oxidative damage, and help keep cells healthier. These are processes connected to both cancer prevention and brain protection. The misunderstanding comes when information is taken out of context or exaggerated. And this is why we need to look carefully at claims before we believe them. When it comes to onions, the science is clear. The fear that they cause cancer or memory loss is not supported by credible evidence. In fact, the opposite is true. Onions are associated with lowering cancer risk and supporting brain health. That is the difference between rumor and research. And knowing this difference allows you to make choices with confidence rather than fear. Summary: key take-home points. One of the reasons people continue to believe myths about onions is because of the way information is shared and amplified in today's world. A single blog post, a dramatic headline, or even a short video clip can create a ripple effect where misinformation spreads faster than the truth. When it comes to health, fear-based messages capture attention, but they rarely tell the full story. The claim that onions could cause cancer or memory loss is a perfect example of this. It taps into two of the most powerful human fears, serious disease and losing mental sharpness. Once that fear is planted, it can be hard to shake, even when science proves otherwise. This is why many people accept such claims without looking deeper, and why it is so important to slow down and understand the real science behind them. To really grasp why onions are unfairly accused, we have to understand how people misinterpret scientific studies. In laboratories, researchers often use highly concentrated onion extracts or isolate specific compounds to see how they interact with cells. These conditions are far removed from how people actually consume onions in daily life. For example, a compound that might have a negative effect in extremely high doses on isolated cells could behave very differently when consumed in normal amounts within the complex environment of the human body. This is a key point. Laboratory studies are useful for generating ideas, but they don't directly translate to real-world risks. Unfortunately, when someone misreads these studies and spreads the idea that onions are harmful, it creates confusion and unnecessary fear. Another reason why myths gain traction is cultural and anecdotal experiences. In some cultures, onions are viewed with suspicion because of their strong smell or because eating them raw can sometimes cause stomach discomfort in sensitive individuals. This discomfort may be misinterpreted as a sign of deeper harm, when in reality it is simply a digestive response that varies from person to person. Just as some people are sensitive to spicy foods or lactose, some may react more strongly to onions. But that does not mean onions are dangerous for the majority of people. The mistake comes from generalizing an individual reaction into a universal claim and then exaggerating it into a threat of cancer or memory loss. It's also important to note that food myths often flourish when people are searching for simple answers to complex health problems. Cancer and memory decline are both influenced by many factors: genetics, lifestyle, overall diet, environment, and aging. Because they are so complex, people sometimes latch on to a single food as the cause or cure. But health is rarely that simple. Blaming onions for cancer or memory problems is not only inaccurate, it distracts from the real lifestyle changes that can make a difference, such as maintaining a balanced diet, exercising regularly, managing stress, and avoiding proven risks like smoking. Onions, far from being a danger, are a positive addition to that bigger picture of health. There is also a psychological reason why myths like these persist. Negative information tends to stick in the brain more strongly than positive information. If you hear once that onions could cause cancer, that idea might stay with you longer than hearing 10 times that onions are good for your health. This is called negativity bias, and it explains why scary health claims often take root more deeply than reassuring facts. That is why repeating the truth and reinforcing it with credible evidence is so important. It helps balance out that bias and allows people to replace fear with knowledge. Understanding all these factors, the way studies are misused, cultural misunderstandings, the search for simple answers, and the power of negativity bias shows why it is so easy for people to believe that onions might be harmful. But when we strip away the rumors and focus only on verified research, the truth becomes clear. Onions are not the enemy. They are, in fact, one of the simplest and most affordable ways to protect your body from oxidative stress, lower inflammation, and support long-term health. The science supports them, history supports them, and even global dietary guidelines encourage their inclusion as part of a healthy diet. The next time you hear someone say that onions cause cancer or memory loss, you will know that the root of that claim is not scientific truth, but misinterpretation, fear, and exaggeration. And instead of letting that fear take hold, you can remember the overwhelming body of evidence that proves the opposite. That is how knowledge becomes power, by cutting through the noise of myths and holding on to what is real. What science actually says about onions and cancer when we look closely at the relationship between onions and cancer, the research is not vague or uncertain. It is remarkably consistent. Onions are part of the allium family of vegetables, which have been studied across many populations and over long periods of time. Scientists have found again and again that people who eat onions regularly have a lower risk of several types of cancer. This protective effect is linked to natural compounds inside onions that act like bodyguards for your cells. They fight oxidative stress, reduce inflammation, and even help the body process and eliminate substances that could otherwise damage DNA. When DNA damage is reduced, the risk of cancer goes down. Far from being a food that promotes cancer, onions are a food that helps your body defend itself. The most powerful compounds in onions are known as flavonoids, with quercetin being the standout. Quercetin is a plant antioxidant that works by neutralizing harmful molecules called free radicals. Free radicals are unstable and can damage cell structures, leading to mutations that may develop into cancer. By providing a steady supply of antioxidants like quercetin, onions give your body tools to neutralize this damage before it becomes a serious threat. Alongside quercetin, onions also contain organosulfur compounds. These sulfur-based molecules not only give onions their distinct smell and flavor, they also play a role in supporting detoxification enzymes in the liver. These enzymes help neutralize carcinogens, the substances that can trigger cancer, making them less harmful and easier for the body to remove. Population studies support these mechanisms with hard evidence. Research has shown that people who consume higher amounts of onions and related vegetables have significantly lower risks of colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, and even ovarian and breast cancer. One large review concluded that regular onion intake was linked with about a 15 to 20% reduction in the risk of certain cancers compared to those who consumed little or none. That is a powerful statistic when you consider how simple and inexpensive onions are to include in daily meals. The evidence is not coming from one small study. It is supported by multiple independent investigations across different cultures and dietary patterns. This consistency makes the conclusion even stronger. Onions are cancer protective. It is also worth understanding how onions may help at the cellular level. Cancer development is a long process that can take years, moving through stages of initiation, promotion, and progression. At each of these stages, onions seem to offer some level of defense. By reducing DNA damage, they interfere with initiation. By lowering inflammation and reducing cell proliferation, they slow down promotion. And by blocking the growth of new blood vessels that feed tumors, they can interfere with progression. While no single food can guarantee complete protection, onions contribute at multiple points in this process, making them an effective ally in long-term cancer prevention. Cooking methods also play a role, and the good news is that onions remain beneficial whether eaten raw or cooked. Raw onions tend to have higher levels of certain sulfur compounds, while cooking can sometimes increase the bioavailability of antioxidants like quercetin. This means that no matter how you enjoy onions in salads, soups, stir-fries, or roasted dishes, you are still gaining protective benefits. Unlike foods that lose their nutritional power when heated, onions hold on to their health-promoting compounds. This makes them versatile and reliable as part of a balanced diet. Some might wonder if eating too many onions could have the opposite effect. The research shows that there is no evidence of harm from normal dietary amounts. In fact, most of the studies demonstrating cancer protection are based on moderate but regular consumption. This means including onions as a regular ingredient, not eating them in extreme or isolated ways. The myth that onions could increase cancer risk when eaten the wrong way simply has no scientific foundation. What matters is consistent, sensible intake as part of an overall healthy lifestyle. It is also encouraging to know that onions do not work alone. When combined with other colorful vegetables, fruits, and whole foods, their protective effects are even stronger. Health is about synergy, where the compounds from different foods support each other to create greater benefits than any one food could offer on its own. Onions are an important piece of that puzzle, but they fit best when combined with a variety of nutrient-rich choices. When you hear people warning that onions might be dangerous, remember what the evidence clearly shows. Onions are not a risk factor for cancer. They are a shield against it. They protect your cells, strengthen your body's defenses, and make it harder for cancer to take hold. The idea that onions themselves cause cancer is not only misleading, it distracts people from the truth that these humble vegetables are one of the most reliable allies in the fight against disease. What science actually says about onions and memory, brain health, just as onions protect against cancer, they also play a surprisingly strong role in supporting the brain and preserving memory. Memory loss is one of the most feared effects of aging, and it is often linked to conditions like Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia. The concern that onions could harm the brain is completely unsupported by science, and in fact, studies show the opposite. Onions contain compounds that actively protect neurons, reduce inflammation in the brain, and improve blood flow, all of which are essential for maintaining clear thinking and sharp memory over time. One of the key players here is quercetin, the powerful flavonoid found in high amounts in onions. Quercetin works as both an antioxidant and an anti-inflammatory agent. In the brain, oxidative stress and chronic inflammation are two of the biggest drivers of memory decline. Over time, these processes damage neurons, slow communication between brain cells, and interfere with the mechanisms that store and retrieve memories. By neutralizing free radicals and calming inflammation, quercetin helps keep neurons healthier for longer. Research has shown that diets rich in quercetin and similar flavonoids are linked to slower cognitive decline, better performance on memory tests, and even a reduced risk of neurodegenerative diseases. Another way onions may benefit memory is by improving blood flow to the brain. Healthy circulation ensures that neurons receive a steady supply of oxygen and nutrients. Compounds in onions have been shown to support vascular health by reducing stiffness in blood vessels and lowering inflammation in the cardiovascular system. Better circulation means a stronger, more resilient brain. This connection between heart health and brain health is well established, and onions contribute to both. By supporting the blood vessels that supply the brain, they indirectly support memory function. Animal studies also provide fascinating insights. Experiments with rodents have shown that quercetin can improve learning ability and memory performance, particularly under conditions of stress or aging. While animal studies do not always translate perfectly to humans, they help explain the biological mechanisms at work. These results align with human population studies that link higher onion consumption with better brain health outcomes. This consistency across different types of research adds weight to the conclusion that onions are not a threat to memory, but rather a food that strengthens it. It's also important to consider the broader dietary patterns where onions often appear. Onions are a staple in many traditional diets known for promoting longevity and cognitive health, such as the Mediterranean diet. These diets are rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and healthy fats, with onions used regularly for flavor and nutrition. Studies of people who follow these diets show not only lower risks of heart disease and cancer, but also better cognitive function and slower rates of memory decline. Onions are not the only reason for these benefits, but they are a consistent and valuable part of the overall pattern. Some skeptics may argue that the strong compounds in onions could irritate the stomach or cause temporary discomfort, and from there make the leap to believing they harm the brain. But occasional digestive upset is not the same as long-term neurological damage. In fact, no credible evidence shows any direct pathway by which onions would impair memory. On the other hand, multiple well-conducted studies highlight their protective role. It is essential to separate temporary side effects that a few individuals may experience from the broader truth of how onions influence health at large. Memory is one of the most precious aspects of life. It connects us to who we are, to the people we love, and to the experiences that shape us. Protecting memory requires a lifestyle that reduces inflammation, lowers oxidative stress, and nourishes the brain with consistent care. Onions fit perfectly into this approach. Instead of being a hidden danger, they provide nutrients and compounds that help the brain resist decline. They are not a magic cure, but they are a simple, affordable, and natural ally that you can include in your meals every single day. When you put the evidence together, the myth that onions cause memory loss falls apart. Not only is it unsupported, but it is directly contradicted by the facts. Onions improve circulation, deliver antioxidants, reduce inflammation, and support the delicate cells of the nervous system. Every bite you take is another step toward protecting your brain from the challenges of aging. That is the truth, and it is far more powerful than fear. Is there any valid way onions could be harmful? While the overwhelming evidence shows that onions are beneficial for both cancer prevention and brain health, it is natural to ask whether there are any situations where onions could actually be harmful. The truth is that, like many foods, onions are not perfect for everyone in every circumstance. Certain individuals may experience problems, but these are usually mild, temporary, and very different from the exaggerated claims of cancer or memory loss. Understanding these nuances helps build a more balanced picture so that you know exactly what onions can and cannot do. One of the most common issues with onions is digestive sensitivity. Onions contain a group of carbohydrates known as FODMAPs, which can be difficult for some people to digest. Individuals with irritable bowel syndrome, for example, may experience bloating, cramping, or gas after eating raw onions. This reaction is not a sign of long-term harm, but rather the body's temporary struggle to break down certain sugars in the gut. For people who are sensitive, cooking onions usually reduces this effect because heat breaks down some of these compounds, making them easier to tolerate. In other words, the discomfort is not proof that onions damage health. It is simply a digestive response that varies from person to person. Another point worth noting is that some individuals may have an actual onion allergy, though this is very rare. Symptoms can include skin rashes, itching, or difficulty breathing, which require medical attention. But these cases are unusual, and most people can safely consume onions without concern. Allergies do not mean that onions are dangerous for the general population. They just highlight that every body is unique. The strong sulfur compounds in onions also give them a reputation for causing bad breath or body odor. While unpleasant, this is not a sign of harm. These compounds are actually some of the same ones responsible for onions' protective effects against cancer and inflammation. The odor is temporary and can be managed with good hydration oral care. It may be a social inconvenience, but it has nothing to do with serious health risks. There is also the question of how onions are stored and prepared. Spoiled or moldy onions, like any spoiled food, should not be consumed because they may carry harmful bacteria or toxins. This is not unique to onions. Any spoiled vegetable can make you sick. Proper storage in a cool, dry place prevents this problem. Similarly, if onions are burned or heavily charred at high heat, they can form compounds that are not healthy, just like overcooked meats or grains. But under normal cooking methods, onions do not produce harmful levels of these compounds. The key is moderation and sensible preparation, not avoidance. Some people also worry about blood sugar or blood clotting effects because onions can interact with these processes. In fact, onions have been shown to help regulate blood sugar and improve cholesterol levels. For people on certain medications, such as blood thinners or diabetes drugs, it may be wise to monitor intake and discuss with a healthcare provider if they notice unusual effects. Again, this is not evidence that onions are harmful for most people. It simply means they can have strong physiological effects, which in many cases are beneficial. Another misconception is that eating very large amounts of raw onion could be dangerous. While it is true that excessive consumption of almost any food can cause imbalances, the studies showing benefits of onions are based on reasonable daily intake, not extreme amounts. Eating 2 or 3 onions a day might cause digestive distress for some, but it does not equate to cancer or memory problems. Balance is always the principle in nutrition. When viewed through the lens of science, the only valid concerns with onions are mild digestive issues, rare allergies, or potential interactions with certain medications. None of these conditions support the alarming claims that onions cause cancer or memory loss. On the contrary, the science consistently shows protective effects for the brain and for reducing cancer risk. Knowing these details gives you the full picture. Onions are overwhelmingly safe, widely beneficial, and only problematic in very specific limited situations. By separating myth from fact, we see that the so-called dangers of onions are either minor inconveniences or rare individual conditions. They do not justify fear, and they certainly do not outweigh the powerful health benefits that onions deliver. Instead of avoiding onions, the real solution is to learn how to prepare and enjoy them in ways that maximize their benefits and minimize any small drawbacks. Examining the "if eaten like this" part, much of the fear surrounding onions comes from the phrase "if eaten like this," which makes people think there must be a hidden danger in how onions are prepared or consumed. This phrase is powerful because it suggests a secret trap, something that could harm you without your knowledge. But when we examine it carefully, the truth becomes clear. There is no ordinary way of eating onions that causes cancer or memory loss. The phrase is often used to spread alarm without explaining what "like this" actually means. When science is applied, we can see where the misunderstanding comes from and why it does not hold up. One interpretation of "like this" is eating onions that have spoiled or gone moldy. Any spoiled food can cause illness because of bacterial or fungal contamination, and onions are no exception. But this is not unique to onions, nor does it have anything to do with cancer or memory loss. The solution is simple. Store onions properly in a cool, dry place and avoid eating any that show signs of spoilage. That is just basic food safety, not a hidden danger specific to onions. Another interpretation is related to extreme cooking methods. When foods are cooked at very high temperatures until they are charred or burned, they can form potentially harmful compounds. This is true for meats, bread, and even starchy vegetables. Onions, if scorched black at very high heat, may also contain traces of these compounds, but the levels are not significant compared to heavily charred meats. Moreover, onions are rarely prepared this way, and normal cooking methods like sautéing, boiling, roasting, or grilling lightly do not create dangerous levels of these substances. So again, the science shows there is no realistic risk when onions are cooked and eaten in normal ways. Some rumors claim that leaving cut onions exposed can make them toxic. The myth suggests that onions left overnight absorb bacteria or toxins from the air and then cause illness. This idea has no scientific foundation. Onions are not sponges for toxins, and they do not magically turn poisonous when left uncovered. The only real risk comes from general food safety rules. Cut onions, like any cut vegetable, can grow bacteria if left at room temperature for too long. That is why refrigeration is recommended. The problem is not that onions become toxic, but that any perishable food left in unsafe conditions can grow bacteria. This applies equally to tomatoes, cucumbers, or lettuce. Onions are no different. The phrase, if eaten like this, might also be used to refer to extreme consumption, such as eating huge amounts of raw onion in one sitting. Large doses can cause stomach upset, heartburn, or gas in some individuals, but these are temporary digestive effects, not long-term damage. There is no evidence that even very high onion intake causes cancer or memory loss. What it can cause is discomfort, and in those cases, cooking onions or moderating intake usually solves the problem. Another scenario sometimes included in the if eaten like this myth is mixing onions with unhealthy foods. For example, fried onion rings cooked in deep oil may carry health risks, but those risks come from the oil and frying process, not from the onion itself. When people confuse the unhealthy cooking method with the food, they unfairly blame onions. This is a perfect example of how myths grow out of partial truths. It is the oil, the trans fats, and the high temperatures that create a health risk, not the onion itself. So what does if eaten like this really mean when broken down scientifically? It usually points to ordinary food safety rules, extreme cooking conditions, or digestive discomfort when eaten in excess. None of these scenarios support the claim that onions cause cancer or memory loss. The phrase is simply a scare tactic that plays on uncertainty. Once you understand the real science, the fear loses its power. The truth is that onions are one of the safest and most beneficial foods you can include in your diet. They are versatile, affordable, and packed with compounds that protect your body and brain. The idea that they suddenly turn harmful if eaten like this is a myth built on misunderstanding. By recognizing this, you can enjoy onions with confidence, knowing that they are adding value to your health rather than taking anything away. Debunking the cancer claim, specifically the idea that onions could cause cancer, is one of the most persistent and frightening myths. But when you look at the evidence carefully, it falls apart completely. Cancer is a disease that develops when cells grow uncontrollably, often triggered by genetic mutations and environmental factors like smoking, pollution, or a poor diet. To say that onions, a vegetable packed with nutrients, could be a direct cause of this process goes against decades of scientific research. In fact, almost every major study points to the opposite conclusion. Onions help lower the risk of cancer rather than create it. Onions are loaded with compounds that have been studied for their anti-cancer properties. Quercetin, one of the most researched antioxidants in onions, has been shown to slow the growth of cancer cells in laboratory studies. It does this by reducing oxidative stress, calming inflammation, and even triggering a process called apoptosis, which is the body's natural way of destroying damaged or abnormal cells before they become dangerous. Alongside quercetin, onions contain sulfur compounds like diallyl sulfide and S-allyl cysteine, which have demonstrated protective effects against cancers of the stomach, colon, and breast. These compounds support the liver's detoxification system, making it easier for the body to neutralize and eliminate carcinogens. Epidemiological studies back up these laboratory findings with real-world evidence. Researchers have consistently observed that people who consume onions regularly have a significantly reduced risk of cancers, particularly those of the digestive system. For example, large-scale studies conducted in Europe and Asia found that higher onion and garlic consumption was linked to lower rates of gastric and colorectal cancers. These results have been confirmed in systematic reviews, which pool data from multiple studies to provide a clearer picture. The trend is consistent. More onions in the diet, lower cancer risk. Some might argue that certain cooking methods could alter the properties of onions, but the protective benefits appear to remain intact whether onions are eaten raw or cooked. Raw onions may offer higher concentrations of some sulfur compounds, while cooking can make antioxidants like quercetin more bioavailable, meaning easier for the body to absorb and use. This means that onions are beneficial in virtually every form, whether added to salads raw, lightly sautéed in olive oil, or slow cooked in soups and stews. There is no evidence that typical cooking methods transform onions into something harmful. So where does the myth about onions causing cancer originate? One source is the confusion between onions and harmful cooking byproducts. When foods are burned or charred, chemicals such as acrylamides and heterocyclic amines can form, and these have been linked to cancer risk. But these chemicals are most strongly associated with burnt meats or heavily fried starchy foods, not onions. When onions are cooked normally, they do not generate harmful levels of these compounds. Another source of the myth comes from poorly interpreted lab studies where extremely high doses of onion extracts were tested in unnatural conditions. These results were exaggerated, stripped of context, and spread as though they applied to normal dietary habits. This is how misinformation grows, by taking a sliver of truth and twisting it beyond recognition. It is also important to understand that cancer is a multifactorial disease. It does not come from eating one food in isolation, but from a combination of genetics, lifestyle, and environmental exposures. When you place onions into this bigger picture, their role is clearly protective. They are part of a family of vegetables long recognized for their cancer-fighting properties. Nutrition scientists consistently recommend them as part of a balanced diet that reduces risk rather than increases it. Even the World Health Organization and numerous cancer research organizations recognize the value of allium vegetables, including onions, in cancer prevention strategies. They encourage the consumption of these vegetables as part of a plant-rich diet, precisely because of the protective compounds they provide. The message from science is consistent and clear. Onions are a weapon against cancer, not a cause of it. When you weigh the overwhelming evidence of protection against the flimsy claims of harm, the truth becomes obvious. Onions do not and cannot cause cancer when eaten in normal amounts. They fight the very processes that allow cancer to develop. They defend your DNA, they strengthen your immune system, and they support your body's ability to neutralize dangerous substances. Believing the myth only distracts from the real value of onions, which is their role as one of nature's simplest, most accessible, and most effective protective foods. Debunking the memory loss claim, the claim that onions cause memory loss, is another myth that collapses the moment it is tested against real evidence. Memory loss is a deeply emotional subject because it is connected to our sense of identity, our independence, and our ability to live meaningful lives. The fear of losing memory is powerful, which is why false claims about it spread so quickly. But when we look at onions and their effect on brain health, the science tells a completely different story. Onions are not a danger to your memory. They are a valuable ally in protecting it. The compounds in onions that defend against cancer are the very same compounds that defend the brain. Quercetin, the flavonoid that onions are rich in, has been studied extensively for its impact on cognitive function. It works by reducing oxidative stress and inflammation, two of the main processes that damage neurons over time. Oxidative stress weakens brain cells and interferes with their ability to communicate, while chronic inflammation disrupts the delicate networks that store and retrieve memories. By fighting these processes, quercetin helps preserve the structure and function of neurons, allowing the brain to perform more effectively. Several studies back this up with strong evidence. Research on older adults has shown that diets high in flavonoids, including quercetin, are linked to better cognitive performance and slower rates of memory decline. In one study, participants who consumed more flavonoid-rich foods scored higher on memory and learning tests compared to those with lower intake. Animal studies add another layer of confirmation, showing that quercetin supplementation improves memory and learning ability, particularly under stress or during aging. These findings all point in the same direction. Onions do not impair memory, they support it. It is also important to note that onions improve circulation, which has a direct impact on brain health.